The memory paradox. Every experience and decision we make helps shape our identity. But memories, which serve as the foundation for this process, are not flawless records of the past. Over time, memories change. People misremember details, sometimes even recall events that never actually happened. If our memories can shape who we are, but those memories might be inaccurate or false, then how real is our identity? Imagine a child who vividly remembers getting lost in a store at age 5. The panic, the bright lights above, an employee's voice asking if they needed help. That moment becomes central to how they understand themselves. It explains their fear of crowded places, their tendency to stick close to familiar people. Years later, a parent hears them recount this memory and says it never happened. The child was never lost, never wandered off, never cried for help. Yet the memory feels completely real. It has influenced their behavior and how they see themselves. If the memory is false, what does that say about the parts of their identity that were built around it? False memories are more common than most people think. We mix up details, unconsciously fill in blanks, or even invent entire events. This isn't always intentional. Memory is reconstructive, not like a video recording. Our brains store fragments and rebuild the picture when we recall something. Each time we remember, we might alter the memory just a little. Over time, those small changes add up. Even when we believe we're remembering something accurately, the memory may have shifted. A woman, for instance, might remember a high school friend as incredibly supportive. She recalls deep conversations and how that friend stood up for her in an argument. But another classmate remembers things differently. That same friend, they say, actually spread rumors and was only kind when it suited them. Now, the woman faces a contradiction. If her memory is wrong, then what does that mean for her understanding of herself, especially if she built part of her identity on that friendship? Eyewitness testimony in criminal trials shows just how unreliable memory can be. People have been convicted based on what a witness confidently recalled, only to be proven innocent by DNA evidence years later. A witness may feel absolutely sure they saw someone commit a crime. They remember the face, the clothes, the movements, but later evidence shows they were mistaken. Our brains are not perfect cameras, especially under stress. They fill in details that might not be accurate. If we can be wrong about something that's serious, we can certainly be wrong about personal memories too. Our identities are tightly connected to our personal histories. Someone who remembers overcoming a difficult childhood may believe that made them stronger. Someone who recalls a humiliating failure might carry that shame as a core part of themselves. But what happens when those memories change or turn out to be false? A man recalls being bullied in school, the names, the laughter, the isolation. He believes the experience built his resilience. But at a reunion years later, former classmates insist he was well liked. A teacher says he was always surrounded by friends. If they're right, what does that mean for the identity he's carried all these years? As someone who struggled and overcame hardship. If the hardship wasn't quite real, then what part of him is? Even deeply personal memories can shift. Someone might remember receiving life-changing advice from their mother, only to later discover it came from a book or another person. This kind of revelation can be deeply unsettling. People rely on memory to define themselves and maintain a sense of continuity. But if memories shift, then identity becomes unstable. Without realizing it, we often rewrite our past. Nostalgia can make childhood seem happier. Regret can make old mistakes feel worse. Over time, Our memories are edited to fit how we currently feel and what we now believe. Someone who once loved a hobby but later lost interest might remember it as never having been enjoyable at all. Someone who falls out with a close friend may start recalling more negative experiences, forgetting the good times. So if identity depends on memory, and memory keeps changing, how much of identity is truly real? Psychological studies show memory is highly suggestible. The way a question is asked can change how someone remembers an event. For example, if someone is asked, "How fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other?" they're more likely to recall a violent crash than if they were asked, "How fast were the cars going when they bumped into each other?" That means identity, which is built on remembered experiences, can be influenced by external suggestion. If someone is often told they were a troublemaker as a child, they may start believing it, even if their own memories don't align. This issue goes beyond individuals. It affects collective memory too. Families may pass down stories about a relative for generations, stories that help define the family identity. But as details are forgotten or changed, the truth becomes difficult to untangle from myth. Entire cultures, communities, and nations shape identities around shared histories that may be incomplete or inaccurate. So again, if identity depends on memory, and memory is flexible, how real is any identity? A person may remember being deeply hurt by someone and carry that pain for years. But what if their memory of the argument is flawed? What if key details are missing or wrong? What if they later discover the other person never said what they remember, or that the situation wasn't as one-sided? Does that mean their feelings were based on something that never truly happened? Therapists often work with clients who uncover false memories. Some recall vivid traumas that are later disproven. Others repress painful events and only recover them after many years. The brain does not store experiences like files. Instead, it constructs stories that match a person's current understanding of the past. That means people's identities, their sense of who they are built on stories that may not be entirely true. A soldier remembers making a split-second decision in battle that saved lives. That memory defines them. It gives them confidence and purpose. But another soldier who was there remembers it differently. Someone else made the decision. The first soldier's role, they say, was much smaller. If the soldier accepts that version, it could shake their sense of self. If they reject it, their identity may still be built on something that never actually happened. People form identities through experiences, lessons, and stories. These shape their fears, their strengths, their relationships. But if those memories aren't reliable, then identity itself becomes uncertain. We always view the past through the lens of the present. What someone remembers about their childhood depends on how they feel now. What someone believes about a former friend depends on how they view that person today. If identity is rooted in something as fragile and fluid as memory, then we're left with one haunting question. What part of identity is actually real? The paradox of the court. In a peculiar court case, a teacher, seeing a chance to ensure he gets paid, decides to sue his student for the money owed. But this action leads to a logical contradiction that traps both the student and the teacher in a legal and philosophical dilemma. The teacher argues that regardless of the outcome, the student must pay. If the court rules in the teacher's favor, then the verdict enforces the contract the student must pay. If the court rules in the student's favor, then the student has technically won his first case, which, according to their agreement, also requires him to pay the teacher. In either scenario, the teacher believes he is entitled to payment. The student, however, sees it differently. He contends that no matter what the court decides, he should not have to pay. If he loses the case, then the court has declared he owes nothing, therefore, he doesn't have to pay. If he wins, then at the moment of the ruling, he had not previously won a case, meaning the condition to pay the teacher has not yet been met. In both outcomes, he believes there is no obligation to pay. This paradox poses a challenge to legal reasoning, as both arguments appear logically sound, but lead to completely opposite outcomes. If the court rules in favor of the teacher, it supports the student's claim that he has lost his first case and thus doesn't owe payment. But if the court rules in favor of the student, it affirms the teacher's argument that the student has now won a case and must pay. The contradiction exposes a core problem in contracts that hinge on uncertain or self-referential outcomes. This situation raises important questions about the nature of contracts and conditional agreements. Contracts rely on clearly defined terms that outline what must happen under specific circumstances. However, if a contract creates a loop where every possible outcome contradicts the others, then its enforceability becomes questionable. Here, the issue stems from the fact that the condition for payment depends on an event whose occurrence hinges on whether payment is required, a classic circular dependency. Legal systems generally strive to avoid such self-referential contradictions. Yet similar dilemmas often arise in real-life cases. For example, consider a scenario where a company agrees to deliver a product only after receiving payment, while the customer agrees to pay only after the product is delivered. If neither party is willing to move first, the contract reaches a stalemate. This mirrors the teacher-student conflict, where every decision alters the contract conditions in a way that creates an irresolvable loop. The paradox of the court also brings up broader issues in legal reasoning, particularly around intent and obligation. If the student entered into the agreement sincerely, does he still have a moral duty to pay, even if the technical terms allow him to avoid doing so? Conversely, if the teacher anticipated the contradiction and proceeded anyway, is he acting in bad faith by filing the lawsuit? Legal systems often look at intent and fairness when resolving contract disputes. Yet in this case, both sides could plausibly argue that fairness supports their position. Beyond the legal sphere, this paradox touches on broader philosophical issues tied to self-referential rules. Many classic paradoxes arise from rules applying to themselves. Consider the liar paradox, where a sentence declares, "This sentence is false." If the sentence is true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true. The paradox of the court follows a similar structure. The lawsuit both satisfies and invalidates the terms of the agreement simultaneously. This paradox also holds implications for decision-making under uncertainty. In the real world, many decisions rely on conditions that depend on their own outcomes. A company might only invest in a project if it proves profitable, but the project can only become profitable after the company invests. A job seeker might agree to move to a new city only if offered a job, yet employers may prefer to hire someone who already lives there. These circular dependencies can paralyze action unless something external breaks the loop. The paradox is also relevant to game theory, where participants make choices based on their expectations of how others will act. In this teacher-student case, both sides assume their logic is unbeatable. The teacher believes he is guaranteed payment, while the student believes he is guaranteed not to pay. This reflects real-world legal disputes where both parties are confident that their interpretation is correct. Courts are meant to settle such disagreements. Yet in this instance, any ruling paradoxically strengthens both sides' arguments rather than resolving the matter. Practically speaking, This paradox underscores the importance of writing clear and enforceable contracts. A well-drafted contract avoids vague or self-referential clauses that could lead to contradictions. In many cases, courts interpret contracts based on the intention behind the agreement, not just the literal wording. Had the student and teacher added a clause specifying what should happen in the event of a lawsuit, the paradox may have been prevented. Similar paradoxes arise in other domains too. In mathematics, Gödel's incompleteness theorems demonstrate that any sufficiently powerful logical system contains statements that can't be proven true or false within that system. In computing, self-referential loops can cause software to crash or get stuck in endless cycles. In economics, certain pricing models result in feedback loops where supply and demand continuously shift based on one another in unpredictable ways. The paradox of the court reminds us that even simple agreements can lead to logical contradictions if not carefully structured. It reveals that some disputes can't be settled by rules alone, but instead require deeper thinking about fairness, intent, and practicality. While legal systems aim to provide definitive answers, paradoxes like this show the limits of logic when applied to human-made agreements. This paradox continues to spark discussion in philosophy, law, and logic because it illustrates deep issues with how we reason about contracts, conditions, and outcomes. It stands as a powerful example of how seemingly straightforward agreements can produce contradictions when their terms rely on uncertain future events. A legal system ultimately functions within a reality that includes such limits, and this paradox exposes just how delicate those limits can be. The quantum observer paradox. The quantum observer paradox challenges how people understand the nature of reality. It raises a fundamental question. If observation affects the state of a system, what happens when nothing is being observed? This idea originates from quantum physics experiments that reveal particles behave differently when they are measured. Scientists have discovered that observation doesn't merely reveal reality, it appears to shape it. This finding contradicts the common sense view of a stable world that exists whether or not anyone is observing it. One of the most well-known illustrations of this paradox is the double-slit experiment. In it, when scientists shine light or fire electrons at a barrier with two slits, the particles form an interference pattern on the other side. This pattern implies that each particle acts like a wave, passing through both slits at once. However, when someone measures which slit the particle goes through, the interference pattern disappears. Instead, the particle behaves like a solid object passing through only one slit. This simple act of measuring alters the outcome. If the observer had not measured it, the particle would have acted like a wave. Because it was measured, it acted like a particle. This suggests that at the quantum level, particles don't have definite positions or states until they are observed. Prior to measurement, they exist in a superposition, taking all possible paths at once. But the moment someone observes them, they collapse into a single state. This leads to a profound and strange question. If something is not observed, does it exist in a definite state at all? The answer seems to rely on the act of measuring. But if measurement changes reality, then reality may not exist in a fixed form without an observer. This isn't just a theoretical problem. It appears in real-world quantum experiments. Scientists have tested how observation affects outcomes by delaying when they measure particles. In some cases, they decide after the particle has already passed through the slits whether to measure it. Yet the delayed measurement still changes the result. It seems as though the particle somehow knows whether it will be observed in the future and adjusts its behavior accordingly. This leads to an even bigger question. What qualifies as an observer? In classical physics, Reality exists independently of observation. A rock remains on the ground whether or not someone sees it. But in quantum mechanics, an observer doesn't have to be a person. A measuring device can also collapse a quantum state. Some physicists argue that any interaction with a quantum system counts as observation. Others believe that consciousness is required. If only conscious beings can collapse quantum states, then reality itself depends on awareness. This raises the paradoxical thought: without an observer, reality might not settle into a definite state at all. It echoes the classic question: if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? In quantum terms, the question is even more extreme. If no one observes the tree, is it even in a definite place? If every particle in the tree exists in a superposition until observed, then the tree, in a sense, may not fully exist until someone looks at it. This unsettling idea extends to the universe itself. The universe existed long before humans. But if observation determines reality, then what kept the universe in a definite state before observers evolved? Some physicists suggest that large systems can collapse their own quantum states. In this view, the sun and earth became stable before human life because complex systems naturally interact in ways that function like measurements. Others argue that the universe must have a fundamental observer, leading to interpretations where consciousness plays a role in shaping reality. Some scientists reject this notion and claim that observation doesn't create reality. It only forces it into one observable state. In this interpretation, quantum systems always exist in some finite form, and measurement merely reveals which one. The problem, however, is that no one can prove what happens before measurement. Quantum mechanics only predicts what will happen once something is measured. What occurs before that remains unknown. Some interpretations suggest that reality constantly branches into different possibilities, and measurement merely selects one. In this view, all possible outcomes coexist, but we experience only one of them. The paradox becomes even more bizarre when applied to living things. Schrödinger's cat is a famous thought experiment that illustrates how quantum mechanics could affect everyday objects. In this scenario, a cat is placed in a box with a radioactive atom. If the atom decays, it releases poison and kills the cat. If the atom does not decay, the cat remains alive. Since radioactive decay is a quantum event, the atom exists in a superposition of decayed and not decayed until it is measured. If the atom's state is uncertain, then the cat's fate is also uncertain. Until someone opens the box, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. This idea seems absurd because people do not see cats in two states, but it illustrates how quantum uncertainty could extend to larger objects. If quantum rules apply to all things, then the same principle must apply to bigger entities, including living beings. The paradox reveals a deep divide between quantum mechanics and everyday human experience. People perceive a world of solid objects that exist independently of observation, but at the smallest scales, reality does not behave this way. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics avoid this paradox by proposing that measurement isn't the only explanation. One alternative is the many worlds interpretation. In this view, the universe splits into different versions with every quantum event. In one universe, the cat lives. In another, the cat dies. Both outcomes happen, but each exists in a separate world. Here, observation doesn't change reality. It only determines which version the observer experiences. Another interpretation is quantum decoherence. This idea holds that quantum superpositions do not collapse because of observation, but rather break down when they interact with larger systems. In this view, objects seem to have definite states because interactions with the environment force them into stable conditions. This avoids requiring an observer, but still leaves unanswered the question of why one specific reality emerges. The paradox also relates to artificial intelligence and consciousness. If observation creates reality, then machines that measure quantum states might count as observers. But if only consciousness collapses reality, then artificial intelligence may not have the same effect as a human observer. This opens deeper questions about what qualifies as consciousness and whether reality depends on awareness or just physical interaction. The quantum observer paradox challenges fundamental assumptions about the universe. It suggests that the universe may not exist in a definite form unless something is there to observe it. This idea brings up scientific, philosophical, and even existential questions. It compels people to reconsider what they mean by existence and reality in a world where observation plays a defining role. The paradox of the stone. The paradox of the stone challenges the concept of an all-powerful being by presenting a problem that appears impossible to solve. If God is omnipotent, he should be able to create a stone of any size or weight. However, if he creates a stone so heavy that even he cannot lift it, then there is something he cannot do. He cannot lift the stone. On the other hand, if he cannot create such a stone, then there's still something he cannot do. He cannot create an unliftable stone. In either case, it seems there is a limit to his power, which contradicts the idea of being all-powerful. This paradox is often discussed in debates about omnipotence, a term that means unlimited power. If a being is truly omnipotent, then nothing should be impossible. However, this scenario presents a contradiction, suggesting that either omnipotence is not possible or that the definition of omnipotence needs to be reconsidered. Some argue that the paradox stems from a misunderstanding of what it means to be all-powerful. Others believe it exposes a deeper flaw in the concept itself. One way to analyze the paradox is by breaking it down into two possibilities. If God can create the stone but cannot lift it, he is not all-powerful. If he cannot create the stone in the first place, he is also not all-powerful. This creates a logical trap. To escape this trap, some have argued that omnipotence does not include the ability to do the logically impossible. A logical contradiction, such as a square circle or a married bachelor, is not something that even an all-powerful being should be expected to create. From this perspective, the question itself is flawed because it asks whether an all-powerful being can perform a self-contradictory task. Another response is that omnipotence should be defined more precisely. Some philosophers have suggested that being all-powerful means having the ability to do anything that is logically possible, rather than everything imaginable. Under this definition, creating an unliftable stone would not be a real task, because it contradicts itself. An all-powerful being can lift anything. So asking for something that such a being cannot lift is essentially asking for something that cannot exist. It's similar to asking whether an omnipotent being can create a triangle with 4 sides. The task itself makes no sense, so it's not a limitation of power to say that it can't be done. Others have tried to solve the paradox by arguing that omnipotence includes the power to limit oneself. According to this view, an all-powerful being could create a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it, but only if he chooses to limit his own power. This interpretation suggests that omnipotence includes the power to self-impose restrictions, not just the possession of overwhelming strength. Some theologians believe this is supported by religious teachings. In certain traditions, God has chosen to limit his own power to grant humans free will. If an all-powerful being can choose to limit himself in that way, then perhaps he could also choose to create a stone too heavy for himself to lift, even if he could later choose to remove that limitation. There is also the view that the paradox misunderstands the relationship between creation and power. Just because something is created doesn't mean the creator loses control over it. A human example may help clarify this idea. A programmer might design an artificial intelligence that follows certain rules. That doesn't mean the programmer is powerless over the AI. Similarly, creating a heavy stone does not automatically mean losing the ability to lift it. The paradox assumes that creating and lifting are separate abilities, but an all-powerful being may not be bound by such distinctions. Another interesting approach considers the paradox in terms of infinite power. If an all-powerful being possesses infinite strength, then any stone he creates must also fall within the realm of infinite possibilities. A stone so heavy that even an infinite being cannot lift it would also have to be infinite. But when dealing with infinity, adding more weight doesn't make a meaningful difference, because infinity doesn't work like ordinary numbers. If a being has infinite power, then the idea of something being too heavy becomes meaningless. The paradox, therefore, may not apply to a being whose power surpasses human conceptions of strength and weight. Some philosophers argue that the paradox highlights a deeper issue with language when applied to divine attributes. Human language is built around finite concepts, strength, weight, lifting, all derived from human experience. When these ideas are applied to an infinite being, they may no longer make sense in the same way. The paradox assumes that God's power operates like human strength, but if divine power is fundamentally different, then the paradox doesn't hold up. Another way to address the issue is through logic itself. The paradox assumes that being all-powerful means being able to do anything whatsoever, including things that are logically contradictory. But logic imposes constraints on what is meaningful. If an omnipotent being is still bound by logic, then the paradox isn't a real problem. It simply asks whether a being can do something that cannot logically be done. Some argue that this is similar to asking whether an omnipotent being can make 1 plus 1 equal 3. The laws of logic remain valid, even for a being with unlimited power. The paradox has also been used in debates about divine power across different religious traditions. Some religious thinkers accept that God's power has limits, not because he is weak, but because certain actions are nonsensical. They argue that true omnipotence does not require the ability to do absurd things. Others believe that divine power includes the capacity to act beyond human logic, meaning the paradox does not apply at all. There are also those who view the paradox as a useful tool for challenging assumptions about power in general. If unlimited power leads to contradiction, then the concept itself may need to be re-examined. Some see this as a reason to doubt the existence of an all-powerful being, while others take it as a reason to refine what omnipotence actually means. The paradox pushes people to think deeply about how we define power, and whether human logic is adequate to describe the nature of an omnipotent being. The paradox of the stone has been discussed for centuries and remains a popular topic in philosophy, theology, and logic. Some interpret it as a reason to reject the idea of omnipotence. Others see it as a sign that the human understanding of power is flawed. No matter the viewpoint, the paradox continues to provoke thought and encourage deeper reflection on what it truly means to be all-powerful.